Don't know already, we're in the Lucas Plan workshop, and I want to introduce you to our speaker today, who is Dave King. Dave is a former molecular biologist, and he's been writing and campaigning on politics of biotechnology since 1990. He's also a member of the Breaking the Frame working group, which has organised events on the politics of technology for the last few years, and of course he was the main organiser for the conference back in 2016, which is celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Lucas Plan. Just to give you a little bit of how we're going to run this session, Dave's going to enlighten us for the next 20 minutes, say, and then we're going to have a short Q&A at such session. And then what we're hoping to do as well is have a more practical session afterwards, where we will be providing you with some sheets with lists of criteria for defining socially useful production, and get people to work in some small groups, and then we're going to come back for a general discussion. So it's a lot to fit into the time that we've got. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Dave King. Thank you, Dave.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for coming, everybody. And what I want to kind of situate what we're going to do here within the overall framework of the conference is that, I think what I've been really impressed by the amount of detailed work that has been done on, particularly on the issue of climate jobs, million climate jobs, and energy democracy, and a whole range of detailed nitty-gritty work's been done on that specific issue. But I personally, and I think a lot of people can see, that the crisis facing the world today is not just the environmental crisis. There's a range of crises. Economic crisis, obviously, in 2008, which is ongoing. Refugee crises, increasing militarisation, international tensions, rise of right-wing populism, and to me they're all basically part of a set of symptoms that come from the crisis of industrial capitalism as a whole. We can look at them as, there's a great tendency to look at each issue in its own little box, and as far as the way I look at them is they're all part of this one big crisis of industrial that's come cumulatively as a result of 200 years of industrial capitalism. So what I'm going to try and do is look at a bit of slightly broader, big vision concepts about basically what is our vision for a society that can transcend industrial capitalism. I'm going to use the example of the Lucas Aerospace Workers alternative corporate plan in the 1970s to talk about that. I'm not going to give you too much history, because there's lots of materials about that online. In fact, we're in a moment in the process of digitising the actual archival material from the Lucas Plan, which will be available online, hopefully next year maybe. So there's a lot of material online. In fact, there's a very good film that's been produced in the last couple of years with interviews from some of the shop stewards that were involved in the Lucas Plan, trying to relate it to the issues that the world faces today. Because that was what came really clearly out of our conference in 2016, is that those ideas that those workers developed in the 1970s are totally relevant to the situation in the world today. And I'm going to emphasise one aspect of that I'm going to emphasise, because I think it gets neglected, is that in addition to social values and an economic organisation that is needed for a new society, there's also a need for technology that is consistent with the values of that new society. And this was, I think it was a great strength of the Lucas Aerospace Workers, was understanding that technology is not something that just happens, as the liberal model of science and technology will tell you, the process of development of technology is a process of political and ideological decisions as well as technical decisions. So I'm going to, they developed a very sophisticated politics of technology design that I'm going to talk about a bit, and it's very relevant in particular to the kind of other big issue which I didn't mention in my list of crises before, which is the looming issue of automation and elimination potentially of large swathes of jobs across the economy. Here's the brief history bit. So Lucas Aerospace was a company, key part of the UK defence industry in the 1970s, produced lots of components for fighter jets in particular, and they were in this situation in the mid-1970s, economic recession, Labour government which theoretically had a policy of cutting defence spending, and the other thing which I'll talk about more is the introduction of new computer controlled machinery, which was again threatening their jobs. So they could see, and it was very clear that the company wanted to drastically reduce the employment. So what they did after they went and talked to Tony Benn about, who was at that point Minister of Energy, was it? Or maybe, I can't remember.
Technology, I think it was.
Whatever. And they had a meeting with him and said, can we just nationalise the company? And he basically said, no, I don't have the power to do that. But why don't you develop an alternative plan for how you can use your company's skills and technology to create socially useful products, which will allow the company to diversify what it does and so provide you with employment. And they went away and they thought about that for a long time, and they said, yeah, this is what we want to do. And so what they did was that they sent around a questionnaire to the workforce in their factories. It was a company that employed 18,000 workers around the UK, and about the same number, about 18 or 20 plants in different parts of the country. And they asked the shop floor workers, what could this company produce that would be socially useful and would allow us to maintain our jobs? And they got back about 150 ideas covering a whole range of industrial sectors, very interesting. They were, many of the ideas well ahead of the time and now in standard use: hybrid car engines, wind turbines, certain types of medical equipment, heat pumps, a lot of which had very clearly a strong commercial potential, actually, could provide the company with a lot of business. So they developed this plan, and by the way, I will just pass round you a copy of this is the 53-page summary of the plan. The whole thing went to over 2,000 pages, 6 volumes. And that's just a very brief summary with no technical detail in it. Anyway, I think it shocked a lot of people because it kind of gave the lie very strongly to the mythology about working class people, that all they can do is, you just have to tell them exactly what to do, and then they'll, then they can do it. But they don't have the intelligence and the mental capacity to actually innovate and invent things. So it was very surprising to a lot of people in that way. You won't be surprised to hear that the plan was not accepted by the company, even though it was full of commercially viable ideas, and basically because it was an exercise in workers' control. Basically, it was threatening what the management considered to be their right, what they call their right to manage, which means critically deciding what the company produces using what technology. So it was a very big threat to that, and that was the fundamental reason, I think, why it was rejected by the company. And so it never was implemented, But what the shop stewards, continue to insist is, and they're absolutely right, that it did what it was set out to do, which was to actually save their jobs, because Lucas was never able to actually cut the jobs in the different plants until well into the 1980s, and that was because for two main reasons. Because by taking that moral high ground of producing socially useful products, they really strengthened the morale of the workforce in the industrial struggles that they faced. And of course it won them huge amounts of popular support, became an international movement, they became celebrities, and they were nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979 in recognition of what they'd done. This wasn't a kind of hippie kind of let's be nice and make nice stuff. We don't want. No, this was absolutely hardcore industrial struggle, basically, going on there, and they took a different approach to it, and I think what inspired so many people was that it was a very positive approach. The traditional defensive trade unionism, is all about fighting the ways in which management will always try to worsen the terms and conditions, and get rid of people and all of that. And workers tend to react to that. Their approach was much more positive, and I think that's what people liked about it, really. The plan was never put into operation. There were certain bits and pieces of it that did get made. Some prototypes got made, but never really, became commercially, got used commercially. One very interesting thing that happened that came out of it was that a bunch of the people who moved on from Lucas were involved in the Greater London Council in the early 1980s, before Margaret Thatcher abolished it, and they set up a thing called the Greater London Enterprise Board, part of which was what they called People's Technology Networks, whereby they set up workshops in different communities around London, tried to work with local communities and ordinary people, encouraging them to think about, what about making inventions through their own ideas, and a bunch of very, very interesting stuff. They was quite problematic in a lot of ways, but their ideas of democratising technology design, I think is still a very powerful one. Okay, so that was the standard story of the Lucas plan that I've given you there. And now I'm going to tell you about the bit that tends to get forgotten, because I think however much we try and think in this way, it is so it's very, very hard in our society when we've been brought up with a liberal model of science and technology as it's politically neutral, and if there's any problems that are caused by it, or basically that's down to bad people using it in the wrong way. And the left will always say, rightly enough, that it's capitalist corporations behaving badly, but they realise that there's actually an inherent politics of technology and technology design. And it was, again, it's a very concrete thing, isn't it? Not some kind of theoretical construct. They were facing the introduction of the first wave of computer-controlled machinery, particularly for metalworking, machine tools. This was, there wasn't just them, there was a whole movement around the world, trying to deal with the introduction of new technology in the 1970s. Very interesting. All kinds of things were developed by trade unionists. The US International Union of Metal Workers produced what they called a Technology Bill of Rights, which said, amongst other things, that technologies that are harmful to society or people will be resisted. It was a big focus of industrial struggle at that time was around introduction of new technology. The Lucas Aerospace workers were part of that, and they In fact, in 1980 and 81, they forced the company to have a one-year moratorium on the introduction of new technology while they consulted with the workforce about how it's possible, whether it's possible to have this technology without. Firstly, that technology, this process of capital intensification of production, of replacing human labour with machinery, is an ongoing dynamic of capitalism, and it always tends to de-skill people's jobs. Basically, it transfers people's tacit knowledge and training from out of workers' hands and brains and into machines, and therefore you become a machine operator that just stands and presses the button at the right time. So that's that kind of process of de-skilling of people's jobs is well recognised by trade unionists, has been since the 19th century, is a process whereby jobs, which basically reduces workers' bargaining power vis-à-vis the management, because the management are no longer dependent upon their relatively scarce skills, and so they can hire cheaper labour to press the button on that machine, and eventually it leads to complete elimination of the jobs through full automation. So they were part of that, and one of the things that they developed was one of the most interesting things for me, at least, of the Lucas project was the idea of human-centred technology, and what they meant by that was technology designed specifically not to eliminate skills, but on the contrary, to utilise those skills to the maximum extent. So it wasn't that they, were against machinery. It's about the politics of the design of that machinery and the political, choices that are made there. And so I think they developed some criteria for what they meant by socially useful production, which was their key phrase. And two of their three criteria were precisely about production methods. They weren't actually so much about what we produced, they were about production methods. One was that the product should be produced in a labour-intensive manner. There's a scary phrase for you. A labour-intensive manner. And the product must lend itself to non-alienating and non-hierarchical production methods. Work must be organised to link manual and theoretical tasks and allow human creativity. That's a very crucial wording at the end there, to allow human creativity, and in order to allow socially meaningful work. So I think to sum up or some of that, I think the point is that socially useful production is based, or partly on, on what we produce, but it's also based on the production systems, and it's based on a production system which incorporates human values, not just, the technocratic capitalist values of system efficiency. Let's see, where are we? Getting there. I'll talk a bit actually about. I'll leave that until I talk a bit about the just transition aspect of this. But I think what for me is one of the crucial reasons why a new Lucas plan is a good idea for now is that it's about an integrated vision of what future we want, which is not only about social values and economic organisation, it's also about what kind of technology we need. I think the reason why industrial capitalism has been such a tremendously powerful system that has basically swept any other modes of production that existed in the world before then, swept it all away. The reason it's been so powerful is because you have a set of industrial concepts, political design concepts, and a set of political social relationships which mesh with each other perfectly, which reinforce one another, and that's what produces such a powerful system. And to replace that, we have to try and do the same thing of addressing all a system of technological design. And I'm just going to read you a quote from Mike Cooley, who Mike Cooley was one of the key theorists of the Lucas Plan. This is from his book, which, by the way, I've got just one copy of here if anybody wants to buy it from me afterwards. Anyway, so he says, choices are essentially political and ideological rather than technological. As we design technological systems, we are in fact designing sets of social relationships. And as we question those social relationships and attempt to design systems differently, we are then beginning to challenge in a fundamental way power structures in society. The alternatives are stark. Either we will have a future in which human beings are reduced to reacting to the systems and equipment specified for them, or we will have a future in which masses of people conscious of their own skills and abilities in both a political and a technical sense decide that they're going to be architects of a new form of technological development which will enhance human creativity and mean more freedom of choice and expression rather than less. So yeah, it's a very clear expression of, there are different political pathways in technology design there, and that those choices have really, really fundamental effects on our whole society. So okay, so now I'm going to briefly say a little bit concretely about the new Lucas Plan group, which came out of the conference that we organised. We thought we were just organising a conference, and what became really clear was that there was a tremendous positive feeling at the conference and a lot of energy for going forward. So we're taking it forward, and we're trying now to think about how is this relevant to the crises of the 21st century. So the conference had 4 main themes, and we've got 4 working groups that relate to those themes. First is arms conversion, or otherwise called defence diversification. You may know that the Labour Party has a policy of setting up what it calls a Defence Diversification Agency, and one of the successes of the last year that we've had was that we organised a motion at the TUC Congress which was accepted that called for Labour to set up a Defence Diversification Agency, and for the first time Unite was willing to support that conference. There's been a lot of scepticism in the trade union movement, kind of understandably, about alternative plans, workers' plans, because many of them have not actually been implemented. I think there's a beginning of a shift in Unite there, which we're quite pleased about. I think the Just Transition resolution at the TUC Congress has been mentioned. We have a working group on that, and they've been instrumental on producing a joint statement on just transition that you probably would have seen floating around the conference, and we've been helping to produce that. We have what we call bottom-up local economic planning working group. I think that obviously one of the key things that Lucas was about bottom-up planning rather than hierarchical, technocratic, top-down planning. And there's a lot of energy now around that in relation particularly to local industrial and local economic planning. We're working, for example, with a group called Just Space, who are focused on the London plan. That's one key element. And finally, there's a working group which I'm particularly interested in, which is about dealing with those threats of the wave of automation that is going to come through in the next 10-15 years, we're told, and may eliminate lots of people's jobs. There's a film, as I mentioned, which is really good. If any of you are part of radical film societies, that's a great one to set up a screening. We can provide you with a speaker. We're working on this pamphlet, which will be coming out some point this year, which looks at those 4 things and tries to draw them together. So yeah, nearly finished. So overall, what we're looking at, and I think coming back to what I was saying at the start, is that well, I see it as a project for a new economy, a new post-industrial capitalist economy, based on social and human values, rather than a system that subordinates those values to economics, where we can't do anything because it's not economic. And it's in a sense, it's a kind of alternative economics. It's an alternative economics project, and there are a lot of those about. I've been finding out now. The ideas around the commons, in particularly, are very popular at the moment. But I think what I think the contribution a new Lucas plan can make is that it's an alternative economic project with basically an unashamed and unapologetic socialist inbuilt politics that says what we want is production for need and not for profit. And so I think that's really an important contribution that we can make. So yeah, we're very interested in working with trade unionists in particular, local activists on in a range of different issues, and engineers and scientists. And yeah, so now once we've had a quick Q&A, what we need to do is to basically get your ideas. We want to know your ideas for that vision of what does an economy based on socially useful production really look like. As I mentioned, the Lucas Aerospace Work has developed some criteria. Mike Cooley, in his book, I'm going to give you a list of them, developed a whole lot more. We're looking to kind of build the ideas for this from the bottom up.
Are you ready for take some questions?
I think so. Yeah.